You know, ish happens. No matter what we do, no matter how hard we try or how hard we plan, life throws you curveballs, right? And suddenly you find that you're not able to write, or there are other things that can threaten your writing business. So in this video, we're going to talk about planning for the unexpected and how you can do that. What's up, guys? Michael Laron here with Author Level Up, helping you write world-class stories better and faster. And I create these writing videos because I believe that each of you has a Stephen King level talent and you just need help unlocking it. So if you're new here, consider subscribing and click that little bell, ding, 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 to get notifications every time I have a new writing video. And this video is part of my organization series where we're diving into how to organize and approach every element of the writing life so that you can be successful. And today we're talking about planning for the unexpected. So I'm going to do something a little bit different, unexpected, and we're going to jump over into my computer and we're going to talk about all the different things that can threaten your writing business. Going to do a different type of video this week. We're going to do a screen share, but I wanted to let you know that before we continue, you can download a copy of this screen share presentation in the link in the video description so you can look at it later, peruse it to your heart's desire. And I also wanted to let you know that the app that I'm using today to do this screen share is Minddomo. So Minddomo is a fantastic mind mapping app that has tons of different practical uses. You can grab your copy at the link in the video description or at authorlevelup.com/Minddomo. I've also done a video review on this app and it's just phenomenal. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to talk about things that can threaten your author business because these are there are a lot of curves that life will throw your way, and you have to be able to plan for them and at least understand what they are so that you at least have some sort of battle plan when life does happen. Now, you can't plan for everything, right? You can't plan for everything unexpected that's going to happen, but you can at least attempt to be prepared. So I'm going to go through these quickly, but we're going to spend some time on them. All right. So first thing I want to talk about is the personal health issue, right? So this is, you can't write because of an illness or trauma. Now, this could be your health. So this could be a chronic condition that you might have, such as repetitive stress injury or other personal issues that you might have. It could be an acute condition, right? So you get the flu one night and you just fall down sick, or you fall down and you break your arm, or you could die. I don't want to be morbid, but these are things that are unexpected that can happen that you want to be thinking about. So particularly with death, you want to be thinking about your will, and you want to be thinking about what's going to happen to your work when you die, and how are you going to take care of your family, and where the world is going to go. These are all things that you want to be thinking about. Now, there's also the health of a loved one, which is also something that can throw you a curveball. Right, so your spouse, or many of you probably have aging parents. These are issues that are going to come up at some point, and you just can't expect it. And sometimes maybe you do expect it, and it's a long and prolonged process. And so you just have to be thinking about how you're going to write around some of these things, and if they can be written around. I mean, maybe you need to take care of your family, but it's something that I want you to be thinking about nonetheless. Now, obviously, I went straight toward death and terminal illness, but it could be something as simple as your spouse gets a cold for a week, and you've got to take extra care of the kids, or you've got to do the things around the house that your spouse isn't able to do because they're sick. Right? These are things you want to be thinking about in terms of curveballs. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is job loss. So what are you going to do as a writer if you are a part-time writer and the majority of your income comes from another job? What are you going to do if you lose your job? I mean, it's just real talk. It's a possibility, right? No job is secure. Any job can be replaced. Any job can be eliminated, and you certainly could lose your job. Your spouse could lose their job, and that becomes a problem because in either case, there's a financial burden on the both of you to make things happen. So think long and hard about what you would do if you lost your job tomorrow. How would you keep publishing books? Would you have to take a break from publishing books? That's a decision that you have to make, but it helps to be prepared for it. Now, we're moving into legal territory here. We also have defamation or libel or slander. So this is if you say something that injures or harms someone's reputation. So libel is written and slander is spoken. The best way to prevent this sort of thing from happening is if you're going to say anything, if you're not going to say anything nice, don't say anything at all. You know what your grandma said is absolutely true. You can almost completely avoid this exposure by making sure you just don't talk about people publicly. It's that simple. Don't do reviews. That's a great way to mitigate this potential exposure. If you're going to talk about somebody, keep it positive and keep it factual. Now, we also have some more legal threats here, some things that can come up unexpected that can derail or threaten your writing business. So let's talk about copyright infringement. Now, this is pretty wide-ranging, okay? So if you write books, there are multiple exposures that you may have to deal with from a copyright infringement perspective. If you have a certain passage that it's possible to copy somebody's, right? You don't want to do that. You don't want to copy other people's work word for word. You just don't want to do that. Also, with quotes, you can get yourself in trouble by putting a quote in your book that you don't have permission to use. Quotes are copyrightable, right? So you can certainly get yourself into trouble there. Song lyrics, things like that. You just want to shy away from that. And if you do decide to do something like that, you just want to make certain that you have permission to use it. Now, another area that I'm on a crusade to make sure that people are aware of, because people just don't think about it, is fonts. So if you have a certain font on your book cover, or if you use a certain font in the headers in your chapters, you have to keep in mind that fonts are copyrightable and they are copyrighted. So if you're using a cover designer, make sure you understand which fonts they're using and that they have the licenses to use those fonts. And it might behoove you to purchase a license for that font yourself so that you can avoid these types of claims, because they do happen. Now, if you have a blog or a podcast, you also have a copyright infringement exposure, but you also have a libel and a slander exposure too that we just talked about. So with copyright, with your blog or your podcast or even your YouTube channel, you want to keep in mind three things. All right, you want to keep in mind images, that anytime you use an image, you need a license to use that image, or the image needs to be a Creative Commons license that allows you to use it for that particular cause. But you can still get yourself in trouble with Creative Commons because people steal stuff and throw it up on Creative Commons or put a Creative Commons license on it. So if that's the only thing you're relying on, you could potentially get yourself into some trouble. The best way to deal with images and making certain that you have permission to use images is by using a royalty-free site like Shutterstock or CanStock. Storyblocks.com is one that I use. Basically, these are licensed images. You purchase a license to use this image, and if in the event that somebody is acting a fool and steals an image and puts it up on there, a lot of these sites often offer copyright infringement protections that will protect you in the event that happens. Audio, same thing. If you have a podcast, you just can't play the Rolling Stones music in the intro of your podcast without getting permission. And if you do want to license the Rolling Stones music, I hope you have tens of thousands of dollars, because that's probably what it's going to cost. So there are also sites where you can download music with a certain license to make sure that you stay out of trouble. And the same thing goes with video. I happen to use stock footage on my YouTube channel all the time, just as a way to kind of keep things moving and keep you guys engaged and watching. And if you happen to use stock footage, just make certain that you have permission to use it. This also applies to graphics or any other sorts of types of things that you might happen to use in any of your videos. Now, another area of copyright infringement, and we're going to keep moving through these, but is advertisements. So, don't steal other people's advertising ideas. If somebody writes a tagline that's really cool, don't go and steal that. You could potentially end up in trouble. And there are a lot of ads out there where people are just simply ripping off other successful ads, and you don't want to put yourself in a situation where you're stealing someone's advertising. All right, so moving on down, we're still in the legal territory here, and I apologize for the size of this text here, but we also have contracts. So let's talk about contracts. What is a contract? Well, it's exactly what they taught you in high school. It's a promise between two people to do or not do something in consideration, usually money. All right. So the first type of contract I want to talk about are terms of service, i.e., things that you sign up for. A great example of a terms of service that almost all of you have signed watching this video is the Amazon KDP agreement. In order to publish your books on Amazon, you signed a contract that basically said what you can and cannot do as someone who publishes your books on Amazon. If you publish your books on Google Play, you signed a contract. When I created this YouTube channel, I signed a contract that was many, many pages long that says what I can and can't do in order to participate in the AdSense program and in order to participate on the YouTube ecosystem. Beware of the terms of service. There are a lot of devils lurking in a lot of these terms of service out there. Sometimes these can be copyright grabs where they'll try to steal your content and say that they have your content and they have a license to use it forever or whatever that looks like. Or they might try to impose certain obligations on you. It's all sorts of weird things that are lurking in terms of service. So I just highly recommend that you read the terms of service of any site you sign up for or any service you use. And if you don't agree with the terms of service or you don't understand the terms of service, walk away because it can become a legal headache for you. I have a few horror stories that I can share personally someday about what's happened to me in this area that's made me be cautious. Now, we also have publishing contracts, and this is what people are typically think of when they're authors thinking of contracts. But a publishing contract is more than just a contract. It is a collection of different clauses that can become problematic for you if you are not aware of what you're signing. So in a publishing contract, there are a number of different clauses that you need to look out for. This is not an exhaustive list, but these are things that can destroy people's careers, and I don't say that lightly. There are a number of people who have just had their entire careers destroyed because of these particular clauses. So I won't go into all of them. I'll just pick a couple of them. But a do not compete clause, for example, essentially says that you cannot. It limits the amount of books that you can publish under that pen name while you're publishing with that publisher. And the theory is that if you publish books independently of that publisher, then they're potentially competing with that publisher and robbing them of profits. That's a deadly, deadly, deadly clause to agree to if you're a self-published writer. I would stay away from that at all costs. And then there's also rights reversion. So if you and the publisher don't agree, or if the publisher stops returning your emails, how do you get the rights to your book back? How does that work? Well, this is the particular clause that governs that. And along with the rights reversion, you want to make sure that you're signing a licensing agreement and not a life of copyright contract. Don't give your copyright away. You license your copyright, okay? Another thing I want to talk about is what happens if the publisher that you're working with goes out of business, or what happens if they go bankrupt? What happens to your rights? Do you get them back? Does it not say anything at all? These are things that can be negotiated in the contract. Another thing that can happen that can completely destroy the rights that you have to your work is what happens if the publisher that you're publishing with gets acquired by another company. There have been court cases that have essentially said that the acquiring company does not owe a writer necessarily any type of responsibility in terms of licensing or paying them for their work, or even allowing them to avoid a contract. So you just want to make sure you talk to an intellectual property attorney for these sorts of things, because they can really, really threaten your writing business. All right. And so off on the side on the right here, we got taxes. You can get audited. That's not going to end your business by any means, unless you're committing fraud. Don't commit tax fraud, people. Don't do the Al Capone or Wesley Snipes method. But it can create a headache for you and cost you some money, right? Now, next thing I want to talk about, I'm going to move on here over to the other side of the house, is physical loss. So these are things that can happen any day and every day that can threaten your writing business, destroy your data, which is the most important thing that we work with. Amen. So let's talk about that. We have natural disasters on one side here, so I don't need to talk too much about this, but fires, floods, tornadoes, nuclear attacks, war, these things will either destroy you or they will destroy the business assets that you own, namely your computer or any types of hard drives that you might have with your data on it, any physical books that you might have. These things will certainly destroy those things. And so how do you deal with those? Well, for most of these, with the exception of nuclear attack and war, you can purchase insurance for these things. So make sure that your laptop is insured, right? Make sure your house is insured. Make sure that everything that you own is protected, because another problem that you have to think about if your house burns down is not so much you're not going to be able to write, it's the fact that you're not going to have a place to live. And it's going to be a major headache for you for a long time to have another house rebuilt, and where are you going to live? And so all of that will destroy your writing time. Okay, so make sure you purchase insurance so that you can at least get some peace of mind, so you can get somebody that will help you through that process. Now, we've also got man-made issues, right? So what happens if you're in the coffee shop and somebody punches you in the face and steals your laptop? I know that's a very visually graphic, but it happens. People walking home from the coffee shop or walking to their car and they get their laptop snatched. Or somebody, parks their car and runs into the local convenience store, and then somebody steals the laptop out of their back seat. It happens, right? What happens if you're driving down the interstate and you've got your backpack in the trunk and you get rear-ended and it destroys your backpack? Again, these are things that you can fix and you can address with insurance. Protect your property. All right. And so now we have technological issues as well. So, computers crash. They're not perfect. Apps, they crash. And they can take your data along with them. They're not perfect. It's possible that maybe there's an app that you absolutely love and you swear by it and you won't use anything else. And maybe that app developer is running on hard times and they decide that they can't support the app anymore. Or maybe the app you're using, they just abandon it and it becomes unstable. Or maybe maybe this developer has to raise the price so much that the app you love becomes unaffordable. So these are things that you have to think about as well, because 9 times out of 10, many of you are going to have your work tied up in a proprietary format. So if you use Scrivener, you have Scrivener files to show for it. If you use Ulysses, you're using Markdown, right? Your work is going to be tied up in these ecosystems, and you have to think a little bit about what would happen if that ecosystem were turned upside down overnight. Do you have a plan for that? All right, so let's talk about some other things here, some other things that can threaten your writing business. We also have threats to your reputation, right? And this is something that is becoming more of a thing lately with cancel culture. And you say something that someone doesn't agree with, and next thing you know, you've got a legion of trolls at your door. How do you handle that? You've got threats of doxing. These sorts of things, they're not necessarily going to destroy your writing career, but they can give you certainly a bevy of 1-star reviews and a little bit of physical fear for your life at some point. So you have to think about that. Turn of opinion, if you say something that's unpopular and people rip on you or razz on you for something, that can create a headache, and for some people that can burn people out. So you just want to think about that and think about the type of response that you would have if something like that were to happen to you. Now, we also have the threat of cyber attacks, right? So writers and cyber attacks, though they are not an oxymoron, cyber attacks are on the rise, and all of the data suggests that the people that are most targeted for cyber attacks are not the large mega corporations, though they certainly have vulnerabilities. The biggest targets of cyber attacks are actually small businesses, and all of you watching, I would guess, for the most part, if you write books, you are by definition a small business, and therefore you do not have the protections that a mega corporation might have. And so therefore you are more likely to be hacked and to have your data taken hostage for a small fee. To get that back. So you have to think about that, and investing in a VPN or investing in other ways to protect your data is a pretty smart thing to do, because I don't see the threat of cyber attacks going away anytime soon, and I suspect that it is just a matter of time before writers start getting targeted by this. Now, we also have business income. So business income is what? It's money. And what is money? Royalties. It's all the money that's coming in the door from all the hard work that you've done, right? So what happens tomorrow if your book starts selling? What are you going to do? What happens tomorrow if your book starts selling a lot and all of a sudden you've got more money than you know what to do with? Both of those are threats in their own way to a business. Lack of money and too much money can destroy businesses. And so as a writer, I want you to think about what you would do tomorrow if all the money you made on Amazon stopped. How would you make that back? What would you do, right? These are things I want you to think about. And lastly, we have employee exposure. So these are things that people who are a little bit further down the road have the ability to do, potentially in hiring people. So, when you have employees or you have people who have access to your important documents from a business perspective, there's always a risk, right? There's always a risk that somebody might steal that data and try to use it for something else. The things that you have are work product and trade secrets potentially. They could steal your secret sauce and try to use it for themselves. You've got the risk of hiring and firing people, making sure that you're not running afoul of discrimination laws. Employees can steal things that you own from a business perspective. I certainly hope that many of you don't have local employees, but if you do, workers' compensation is something that you have to think about. You've also got the threat of lawsuits if things go south with the people that you hire. And then you've also just got the fact that you've got to support these people, right? I mean, they have livelihoods. And so that's why an independent contractor may be a better way to hire people if you're going to hire employees. But if you get big enough to a certain point, hiring employees may not be something that you can necessarily avoid, and it is exposure that you may have to think about at some point. All right, so those are exposures that we have as writers that, people don't talk about this, right? It's not sexy, but it is something that can happen. And so first off, how do you prevent exposures and how do you reduce exposures? Well, there are a number of ways that you can address this, and these are things that I picked up in my long career in insurance. I worked in insurance for almost 10 years, and I was a claims adjuster for a long time. I was an underwriter for a long time. I was a manager for a while, and now I'm a product manager at the insurance company that I work for. And I can tell you that there are a number of things that you can do to prevent many of the things that I just talked about in this video. But let's talk about three major ways, right? Three major ways to mitigate or prevent your losses. Now, the first is you can simply avoid an exposure. So when I talked about libel and slander, a lot of this stuff comes about from reviews and it comes about from activity on message boards and forums. If you simply avoid doing that stuff, then you can completely almost eliminate the risk of this happening. Now, you can also prevent exposures, right? So the best way to do that is to come up with some sort of a plan, right? So a contingency plan is typically what is used in insurance to do this, but there are other ways to sit down and think about the exposures that can be prevented, right? Now, there are some exposures that you just simply can't avoid. Right? You just simply can't avoid some exposures. You can't avoid the fact that maybe your house might burn down one day because it gets struck by lightning. You can't avoid that. And so what you can do in that case is a contingency plan can help, but you want to focus on mitigating that exposure, right? So if it does happen, what are you going to do to make sure that you get back to your style of life and your writing as soon as possible to prevent them from eating up too much of your time and money? Well, insurance is a great way to do that. Now, there's also duplication. This is basically making regular backups of your work. So if you've written 50 books like I have, make sure you back those up on a regular basis and then follow the process of separation to make sure that they're in separate places. So if your house burns down, for example, you don't lose everything because you've got a hard drive in a bank safe. It's a classic example of that. Now, there's also diversification. So for example, let's think about this a little bit different. Maybe you publish your book on multiple retailers to avoid catastrophic financial straits if one retailer cancels your account, i.e. Amazon. Like I said, what are you going to do if you wake up in the morning and all your money from Amazon is gone? So by diversifying and making sure you've got money coming in from Amazon and Google and Draft Digital and Publish Drive and Barnes & Noble, then you help to mitigate that exposure somewhat. And then lastly, to mitigate an exposure, keep some money on hand. Start a savings account for your writing and save a little bit of your royalties for taxes, and then save a little bit for contingencies when they come up. So if your laptop dies, for example, you've got some money that you can draw on to go off and buy a new laptop, as opposed to not having any money at all, and then you've got to settle for a suboptimal decision like going to the library to have to write your novel, right? So these are all things I want you to be thinking about when you're thinking about unexpected things and curveballs that life can throw your way. I hope you guys found that helpful. My goal with this was not to scare anybody, but it was just simply to let you know about all the different risks that are out there as it pertains to your writing business. So, quick reminder that you can download the PowerPoint presentation that I just did at the link below. And if you liked the app that I use, be sure to check out my review of Mindomo. That is the app that I use to do this video. So, with that, consider subscribing and take care, and I'll talk to you in the next video.
Perfect.